everyone. Tim here, and we have a special guest today, CtheTree, owner of Land of Redemption and winner of the most recent Lucky Grand Prix. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
So this is exciting because today we're going to be talking about the deck that you've been using to great success to actually win the Lucky Grand Prix, and we're going to be talking about where the deck's been going and where you think it's going to head in the future.
Good deal. Excited to talk about it with you.
All right, so here we have the deck list pulled up, and this is I think the exact list you were using in the finals match, which we've recorded and it's on the YouTube channel. So I'll post that in the description, but we're going to walk through this deck a little bit and do like a mini deck tech. CtheTree had actually also written an article on Land of Redemption, really good read, but we're going to give the basic lowdown summary of this deck and what it's trying to do.
Definitely. Sounds good. You want me to take it away talking about the deck now and explaining the ins and outs?
Let's start with the Lost Souls. I feel like this is the most important part.
Yeah, I mean the deck is called Soul Surfer, and so there are 7 ways in addition to each Lost Soul itself, which makes 8 ways to each Lost Soul to get to each Lost Soul turn 0. And that's kind of the whole premise of the deck, is to try and have a way to interact with most deck builds in the meta through a Lost Soul or a couple Lost Souls. Obviously, if I get to Harvest Time, I can get multiple out. And sometimes I have multiple ways to get a Lost Soul out, and then I'll get 2. But the first one is Crowd's Lost Soul. And so the point of Crowds is if I'm going up against a Matthew deck, I want to get that out turn 0, try and hinder them drawing with Matthew. Additionally, that's also really good against Nazareth decks, because let's say they go first and they manage to, get Nazareth in play. I have that in play first before Nazareth. I can go on my turn and search for my Matthew, draw some cards, and hopefully get a bit of a start there. And so Crowds is in there for that purpose, dealing with those 2 deck builds.
Yeah.
Then we have...
There's also a lot of decks that are trying to like pick apart your hand lately. So this is good insurance against those type of decks too.
Oh, certainly. Hand protection is useful. Of course, it can be a little bit of a double-edged sword against things like the Entrapping Pharisee, but nice thing about Crowds is you can turn it off. So I can draw some cards before using it with Matthew, or, someone like Joanna, or even enter battle with Simon, and he negates Lost Souls. And so there's some ways to, play around with it. Mary Holy Virgin can actually negate it too. So that's another way. If I know that they got in Trapping Pharisee, I'll just do that. But yeah, hand protection is key. The other soul is Salty Lost Soul. And Salty Lost Soul is particularly strong against honeypot decks, getting it out turn 0, because they're trying to tutor for Holy of Holies, pot of mana. This build now doesn't worry much about pot of mana, but Holy of Holies is obviously an issue, and so it tries to slow them down. But there's many builds that want to use a territory class enhancement. Daniel decks, for instance, are pretty dependent on territory class enhancements to get set up. And this build obviously only runs one main deck that's really there for setup, and that's Spirit as a Dove. And so, but that's also good in battle. So it's able to play that Lost Soul really well. And, Salty, sometimes I want to turn it off later, but I can just give it to the opponent and be done with that. But generally, it fits really well here.
When you say give it to the opponent, you mean you like let them rescue it?
Yeah, if they rescue it. I can also, one key thing to note is like Manger. That may seem like a card that's not really all that good, but in this build, it's actually nice because I can, use Manger to negate Salty, for instance, if I need to. And so there's ways to do that without giving it up.
Negate your Complacent. You can negate your own Lost Souls that might be actually hindering you during battle. So this is really cool.
Yep. It is handy that way. And then Complacent, we'll talk about that next. Lots of decks running battle dominance, not as much as the meta last summer. Like you look at some of the decks that were at the top at Nationals, they were just chock full of battle winning dominance on the offensive side. You're seeing a little less of that now, but and like Resurrection, Awesome Things, all those were seeing a lot of play in Disciples lists, and they're very dom heavy.
The resurgence of defensive dominance too, like Murder's Command, Warrior Overtaken.
Yes, and I'd agree. Those are kind of what we're seeing more of now. We're seeing some of these D-heavy decks, and so Complacent deals with those and gives, an offense that would kind of be vulnerable to those a way around them. And so, yeah, it's just, and I don't run a single battle winning dominant in the deck
Yep.
other than three woes potentially. Sometimes Harvest Time played in battle can be nice.
Because imagine opponent's gonna think that they're gonna be able to win the battle with all these battle winning dominants, and then you play Harvest Time, grab Complacent out of your deck, and now they're just stuck with that in their hand.
Exactly. And so that's what they have done a few times, and that's a fun play. And obviously you have dominant initiative as the rescuing player, so that's a handy deal. Then there's two others that are here kind of to mitigate threats to Matthew. And so obviously crowds can mitigate an Azareth, which would be a threat if I have a Searcher Angel and want to go to Matthew. Wanderer Lost Soul, I have it to get rid of my opponent's Crowd's Lost Soul. And so if they get Crowds out, I go turn 0 to Wanderer if I'm going first and swap out with Crowds. But also I found there's other annoying souls. Like let's say they have a Humble Lost Soul that I don't want to deal with. I can use Wanderer to get around that. Wanderer's good. It's really handy for just dealing with opponent's souls that I don't want to, deal with. Another one is undesirables, I can take away their undesirables with Wanderer, which is nice. And then Accusers is really there for Herdsman of Gerar. For a while, I had, ways around every way around Matthew other than Herdsman, but I didn't have anything. And then I noticed, I was like, oh yeah, I can just get Herdsman out, and then that'll negate, or I can get Accusers out, and that'll negate Herdsman of Gerar. And it's also great too, because there's some OT offenses and defenses being run, and in those matchups, it really hurts.
Just get hosed by this.
Yep.
It's like a holy of holies on a stick. Yep.
And you don't really have to. It's easy to tutor for in this build, right? So
you have so many ways to get it out on turn 1 if you need it.
Yep, 7 ways aside from itself. So I found I really like that. And before, Soul Surfer, I've been working on this deck for a long time now. I started working on it. It was probably August of 2022, and I had kind of the first versions around somewhere August to October, somewhere in there. But the build has been through a lot of refinement, and it's had the same basic principle. But before I had OT heroes mixed in, I'd have Noah mixed in, and obviously I went to all NT to make Accusers work. And then the other soul, Humble of course is greatly important for dealing with Honeypot, and I often in a Honeypot matchup I want both Salty and Humble right away. And then even if they manage to get Holy of Holies up, I've got, a way to kind of plug along with Humble. And I think that's one thing that makes this build particularly resilient against Honeypot. Yeah, my offense gets posed by it, but I get Humble really easily. And they can get rid of it, but I can get to it fast, whereas a lot of other builds are just hoping to get to Humble. I can get there. And Humble is just a vital card. FBTN on offense is still super powerful, and a lot of offenses have fight by the numbers. And so Humble's good all around, not just Honeypot. And then Orphans is the one a lot of people would be like, why are you running Orphans Lost Soul? That seems like yesterday's meta.
There's so many good Lost Souls out there. Why this one out of all the ones you could have chosen?
So the reason is I personally believe that people underestimate Soulhide decks. And in my local meta, I have Soulhide decks here. And if I didn't have Orphans, I'd get beat by those. It's still a really powerful defense. And, so I found I there's a guy I play against at local tournaments here, and if I didn't have Orphans, I would lose to his Soulhide deck, no doubt. And so if I were to, play a Soul Surfer build at Nationals this year, particularly with a card we're going to talk about in a minute, I don't think there'll be much Soulhide there, so I would maybe pivot off of Orphans. But in the meta right now, I'm still seeing it show up. And, let's say I go in with a, character that they can do a little chump block with, like Matthew or like Joanna, and they block with someone like Moths. It's nice to have still. So that's why I've kept it there. For me, the card I'd like to have there if I didn't have to worry about Soulhide still would be Distress Lost Soul. I think that would be the best inclusion in that slot. And Yeah, so yeah, that's the soul package. Of course, Hopper. I mean,
Of course,
it
Hopper
thins
goes
your
without
deck
saying.
out, gives you soul gen. It's an auto include, in my opinion, in most deck builds. So
I want to go back to
souls.
just Accusers and how we saw Matthew decks take on a big resurgence. In order to combat Matthew decks, people started just playing Herdsman and trying to get to Herdsman on turn one. And I really like the innovation here of just finding this lost soul and actually turning their Herdsman plan, just making it look pretty weak and laughable if you're able to get this down on turn one.
It definitely, and that's the key though. Like, a lot of Matthew decks aren't built to guarantee it early. They have to chance into it, whereas Soul Surfer is. And so I think that that's something that gives it an edge over other builds running Matthew, because really you look at it, just about anything they can throw at Matthew turn zero to try and stop him, or, I have a way around. Naturally, if they go first and they get Bethlehem Stable or Storehouse, it's a little harder. But me going
Still
first,
yeah,
this has answers for the stuff they can do turn zero.
Sweet. That's enough about the Lost Souls. Let's talk about the heroes. Matthew goes without saying, one of the best cards in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so when I shifted off the Old Testament splash heroes, I had David and Noah splashed in, and originally, if people look at the article I wrote on Land of Redemption, I had another version of this deck, and it had John the Fisherman in, and then in reserve, I had Zacchaeus, and I had Faith of Samuel instead of Baptism of Jesus, and Bless the Nations was in reserve. And so I was trying to, draw with Matthew and then hammer them with rescues where I was going with Mary Holy Virgin to grab Bless the Nations, or Simon backed by Faith of Samuel, or Bless the Nations or Ascension, and then band in John with Zacchaeus and just
So good.
The nasty rescue. And so that was cruising. Like, I won a Rob M Zoom series with that. And then this current Lackey Grand Prix that we just finished, the first 3 games, I was running that version of this offense. And I think it was like 5-2 or 5-1 every game, because it's really powerful offense. And Nick Marshall obviously had kind of that similar idea, but he was doing with Matthias, and he had Resurrection and didn't have Bless the Nations or Faith of Samuel. But one problem with Matthias is he doesn't have unity gospel, so he breaks Mary's unity. And there were plenty of ways to get to Zacchaeus. Joanna can grab him, Sin the Helper can grab him, Virgin Birth, and so that was kind of how I was doing that. So regrettably, though, I faced Jay Chambers playing Honeypot, and that was a very instructive game. I lost that game, and I realized, this is a really strong offense against everything in the meta other than something running Pot of Mana, because those banding enhancements I had, they did nothing for me. I remember one time I did a misplay in that game where I went in, I had everything set up. I had John the Fisherman, I had Zacchaeus, I had Faith of Samuel, and then I forgot about Pot of Mana, and it was just a wasted rescue. And so that made me realize, Honeypot is maybe the best deck in the format. I think there's an argument to be made for that. So I was like, okay, I need to pivot my offense. So this offense is, I cut John the Fisherman. I added in Possessing Spirit main deck. That's an offensive tool. It really is. It's to go in. Number one, it can negate Nazareth, which gives me another way to deal with Nazareth. And then secondly, there's a really nice cheesy rescue with Simon the Zealous choosing it to block. Possessing Spirit has a band ability on him, but a lot of times people won't have the unity to use that band ability. If you have no evil characters in play, which many times people don't when they're facing this offense because they don't want Simon to choose stuff, they don't have unity. And if they have, a splash defense with gospel and non-gospel, they won't have it. And even let's say I'm facing this defense here, I'm facing Herods, and they ban to a Herod. Well, I can use something like Baptism of Jesus to negate Possessing Spirit, and then they're just sitting there, no enhancements to use.
Yeah, and they can't do special initiative to even try to fight that.
No, and so it's a tough situation.
I have a question. So, you're running Possessing Spirit, he requires unity, but sometimes your evil characters are not gospel like Chariot, like outsiders. So how do you navigate this balance of trying to get this card, keep this card online, and also play your characters?
Sure. So the only 2 non-gospel evil characters are Herod, Agrippa the First, and Outsiders. Every other evil character in the deck is gospel. And one thing I found is that if you have just a couple characters that break unity, especially for a card like Possessing Spirit, you can play around it. So let's say I'm needing Possessing Spirit to negate something like their Herod's Temple or their Nazareth. Then I'm not going to block with Outsiders or Herod Agrippa the First while that's out. I've got other blocks. Like the defense here's stout enough that I've got other blocks. But, let's say I don't need that negate anymore. As long as Possessing Spirit is placed, he'll stay there. And let's say I'm just wanting him for the cheese rescue and I no longer need the negate, then I can block with one of those guys and then he'll still stay in their territory and is still available to be chosen with Simon. And so it just takes some playing around. I think like it's okay sometimes to have a deck build where there's some things that would break unity as long as you are able to play around that and know how to do it. So does that answer the question?
Yeah. Would you recommend like most decks that could play Possessing Spirit should play it, or like maybe just on decks that use Simon to kind of choose it as a blocker type decks?
I would say like in a Thieves defense in this meta, it could be smart because if you're running Thieves and let's say it's Gospel Thieves, there's a version of Thieves defense that has some other Crimson stuff splashed in, but I think it could be a good include there. I think definitely with Herods, depending on how you have them built, it can be a good include. And then, Gospel Demons Thieves. But yeah, I think it's a good card in the meta because of Nazareth. And, there's a lot of annoying fortresses. The other thing I like about it here is I don't have Distressed, and it can stop their negate neutral character, like a Resurrection Revealer, and negate them. So So that came in place of John, and then the other heroes are the same that I had in the other version. Joanna, she's really nice if they're trying to not put characters down in their territory that Simon can choose. You just go with Joanna, and then
snipe.
Well, it's true. So I like her because then she punishes them for keeping their characters in hand, and tosses next, and she's also nice because she can draw, but also I like her being able to take a battle winner like Untouchable from reserve, which turn 2 or later, which is handy. Mary is self-explanatory. She's a must for dealing with Holy of Holies, and just such a strong character because of the low numbers. Seeing a lot of play. And Lazarus, I like him a little less now than I did because Nicodemus is seeing so much play. And so, you go in with Lazarus to negate evil cards, and then Nicodemus makes stuff CBN, but he's still really good. Be backed up by something like Baptism of Jesus, Authority of Christ, to love one another. Untouchable is not quite as good because it puts a pause on his negate. But he's a strong rescuer. And then I generally, the other main rescues I'm trying to do, so one is the Possessing Spirit thing, of course, Authority of Christ with Simon, choosing the blocker. Another thing I really like is I like to use Untouchable or his sacrifice, and enter battle, choose someone who's got toughness 7 or less, and then toss one of those off Herod's Temple. And that's really a nasty rescue. I can also toss Untouchable off the cross. And I've gotten quite a few, kind of easy rescues off those because both of those have that 7 strength on them. And so they really hit high. Hard. Yep. A lot of evil characters.
Simon's like one of the most scary cards in the game, I feel like, from a defensive point of view. Like, how do you deal with this card? Like, there's even ways to get him back. You have Patmos, you have, I don't know, Reassuring Angel. So like, this guy's going to be coming at you. You got to be prepared to deal with him.
He probably should have been written just to choose evil humans, not everything. But also, there's never been a choose the blocker character in the game that has so many strong things to back him up. There just hasn't been. Like, Elijah was really good. Ehud used to be really good. He could choose more than just humans, but they didn't have the resources Simon the Zealous has to back him up. Like, even now, like, Zacchaeus is good for choose the blocker, but it's not the same as Simon. Simon is just nuts.
And like another thing that balanced out the choose the blockers characters were they were kind of high numbers. So you couldn't always get initiative when you wanted, but Simon, that's pretty easy to do.
Truly. And so, the other Simon rescue is you use Spirit as a dove. So you choose someone bigger like Emperor Nero, and then, or Herod Archelaus, and then you play Spirit as a dove, grab a battle winner like Love One Another, or Baptism of Jesus, and then play it, and it'll be CBN. And so that's another really strong
Yeah.
Simon rescue. So a lot of the rescues kind of filter, the best rescues are centered around him. But good other rescues are Joanna tossing next, Lazarus negating, and then Mary Holy Virgin just going in with a couple things to back her up, getting initiative, and Ascension, to band in Lazarus. I really like that. That's a strong deal. Obviously, it's not as fun as doing Lazarus with Zacchaeus or John with Zacchaeus banded in, but still good. And then a couple other things with the offense. Lost Child Found is important for clearing out threats. It's nice. There's enough characters to make it kind of viable main deck. It's also in there, of course, for the play Lost Soul from a deck ability. But I really liked Generous Giving. And before I had Blood of the Lamb in previous versions until I went to NT only. But man, it's nice against something like High Priest Ananias because you can play that and interrupt him and then go into Authority of Christ off that. And so, it's really good too, just for card draw, accelerating the deck. But I've been quite pleased with that card. So that's mostly how the offense works. Eternal Inheritance is the closer, of course, wanting to go in and get a fifth soul with Eternal Inheritance.
I love this card. It's just like, I don't need to make a fifth rescue. I can just play this card and finish the game early.
It's not fun to face. And I like kind of to back the offense up. You Will Remain. I used to have Good Seed, but I barely used it. Salty was always negating it. And I shifted over to a Book of the Covenant package, and that's much better. Complacent, of course, protects the offense. And then the Cross. I've had, since I got rid of Golgotha, so Golgotha was in, I cut it for John the Fisherman, and now that slot is Possessing Spirit. And I want Golgotha in here, but it's just spatially, I do feel Possessing Spirit's more important for another way around Nazareth. And so I do end up activating the Cross less, but it's still a worthy inclusion to. And of course, you have to play around some stuff. You don't want the Cross up if you're going to Authority of Christ or Spirit as a Dove in battle. So
I've made that mistake before.
I think many of us have.
When talking about this deck, I was like, why are you playing the Manger? It seems like such a weird card, but you're very, you like to advocate a certain number of cards that can play a Lost Soul from the deck. And the Manger, I guess, is just one of those cards.
It is. I mean, also, it is able to, let's say they have the Cross up and I want to negate that. It can do that. It can also negate Shield. I've used it quite a bit to negate Shield. Shield is a threat and it's a dangerous card. And so having another way to negate Shield is important. Mary Holy Virgin can't do that because she just defaults to territory. But one thing to know about Soul Surfer is that, yes, you do run some suboptimal cards for the purpose of that turn 0 ability to play a Lost Soul from a deck. Day of Judgment. I would never run Day of Judgment in a clay purple list. I just wouldn't. Like, it's not, it doesn't interrupt, it doesn't negate, but it's there because it plays Lost Soul from a deck. The only one of the play Lost Soul from a deck cards that is optimal, that are optimal, are Lost Child Found and the Ascension. Both of those, I think, would be includes, even if I wasn't trying to do Soul Surfer and have as many ways to play Lost Soul from a deck as possible. Those are both really strong. But Repudiating Rulers, I would run Foreign Wives probably, not with Possessing Spirit, but I'd run something else in that slot. I wouldn't have Repudiating Rulers there. It's kind of forced in. And
I had to do a double take when I saw this card. It's like, what is this card? I've never even seen this card before.
So I had kind of, memorized what all the cards were that have play Lost Soul from each deck or a deck star ability. And when I shifted to Accusers, I had a Malachite Slave in, and I had to cut Awake Lost Souls. So I lost one of my ways to play Lost Soul from a deck. I was like, man, Repudiating Rulers would make sense, but I'm like, this thing's not going to block. And so I looked at all the gray enhancements it could get. The best was Strict Sabbath, which is fine against lone, rescues, but especially with Lost Souls around, a lot of times people will place a meek Lost Soul in their territory for something like Protection.
It's not reliable.
And then it's not a reliable block. And then I was like, oh, wait, I can get Duplicity and then go into Unsuccessful. And that is a reliable block. And it's actually been good. And frankly, I've liked it a bit better than having Foreign Wives. Because before I had a Malachite Slave and the Foreign Wives Reserve, but I mean, Futile Inquisition, Unsuccessful, those are super strong blocks. And so Repudiating Rulers has proven to be fine because
and
of that.
Even works with Herod Antipas. So like, let's say you block with Herod Antipas and you know you're not going to get initiative, you can just grab Duplicity so that when they try to remove you, you can just play your Feudal Inquisition or something else.
Definitely. It has good synergy. But yeah, looking at the deck, a lot of these Play a Lost Soul from a deck cards are not, the best use of that slot, unless if you're considering what it does for you turn 0. Because here's the thing, a lot of decks you go second, and in this meta, it's hard to catch up. It really is. This deck tries to avert that, and that's why I've liked the strategy all along. The first kind of way I got the idea was before I even thought of Soul Surfer. This was back when the Widow combo was a thing. And so I was trying to figure out how to beat that deck. And I figured out, if I do Vain Philosophy and run Crowd's Choice and then Harvest Time, I'm able to get to Crowd's Lost Soul. And then there was another one that was bad for Widow. Salty, I don't know if Salty was around yet, but there was another Lost Soul that I wanted to get out back then. And I built a deck, and I won a Lackey Grand Prix with that deck that was trying to do turn 0 interaction. And there's this guy, he's a national champion. His name's JD Cunningham. He's not around anymore, but that was kind of his last tournament. And he had won a couple Lackey Grand Prix. He was almost undefeated in Lackey Grand Prix that spring and was just crushing everyone with his Widow combo deck. And I played him in the final, and like the strategy worked, having turn 0 interaction. And so I think that it's a good strategy, but you do sacrifice something to do it. You run suboptimal cards. Like Manger, it has a purpose here, but it's not the best. But that's the whole idea of the deck. And sometimes it hurts because like sometimes someone gets around the counter, they get around the soul, and then you're sitting with that card in hand, and it's like, man, I'd way rather have something else. But a lot of times it's really good.
You want to talk briefly about the defense before we talk about another card that's entering Redemption that might affect the playability of this deck?
Yeah, it's a pretty standard Herod's list, aside from things like something like Repudiating Rulers. I go with the Herod Antipas to Futile Inquisition and Contagious Fear route over Executioner and Foreign Horses. I personally prefer having negates to back up my Herod's main deck rather than putting stuff like Futile Inquisition main deck or, like Abandonment. The reason is it's just those cards, they're big characters, right? And so they go in with someone tiny. I'm going to prefer to have a negate if I don't have Herod's Temple in play to back up Agrippa's or Archelaus. I'd prefer to have that. Also for outsiders, negates are nice to back outsiders up if it's underdecking. So that's kind of the route that I've gone. The defense has done fine for me. It gets enough done. I do run Herodias' Daughter main deck to have another way around Nazareth. I have outsiders to have another way around Nazareth. And so Foreign Spears, another way around Nazareth. Obviously, I'm trying to get around Nazareth. The deck has like, I think, 8 or 9 ways around Nazareth turn 0 altogether, including Harvest Time, because I count it as a way since it gets to, stuff that can really make it hard for the Nazareth player to get set up. But yeah, if Nazareth weren't in the meta, I would have Herodias' Daughter in reserve, not main deck, but it's there. And if it hits play, you want a way around it as soon as possible. And so that's kind of the idea there. But with Herod's, you've obviously played Herod's a lot. It's a nice defense because you get to basically get to the character you want through Deceiver or Herod's Guard, and then have really tailored blocks depending on what you're going against. One of my favorite things is Herod's Guard. It prevents the next, and so let's say that I'm able to play an enhancement with initiative before they do something like Revolt, then it's preventing them from, interrupting or negating Revolt. And so that's one thing I keep an eye on when I'm running Herod's. Also, of course, Foreign Spears, you equip it, and then if I've got my Herod's Temple, I can just enter in and toss it if they rescue someone like Mary. So that's a strong little deal with that. So yeah, and in reserve, like it's got a lot of firepower there because I've got, 3 blocks with 2 with Antipas and then 1 with Repudiating Rulers and 10 successful. So the defense has enough, firepower, I think, to even in games that have kind of gone sideways, keep things balanced. Like I don't, the deck that won Nationals this year, Nick Marshall, incredible deck, but I don't think going down to that few evil characters with Herods is the right approach now. I think you want a little more. My kind of generally, if I have Darkness Lost Soul, I'm going 7 evil characters, but I don't have Darkness here, so I run 8. I don't count Possessing Spirit in the count because I feel like I want to make sure I have a block. No, never. So so that's the defense. I think that's about it there.
The cool thing to me is like how much Herods can do without a lot of investment. Like you're only playing 3 evil enhancements. And sometimes that's all you need, just like a Herod's Temple or Herod Archelaus, and opponent doesn't have an answer to that, and you got the block, and you can continue on with your life.
I think Herod's Guard is the key to where you can only run 3 battle winners to back it up, main deck, because that Prevent Next, it's really good, and Herod's Guard's a little weaker with Holy of Holies around, but in other matchups, such a nice thing having that Prevent the Next good card. And obviously I don't run Overtaken here. I'd only have 1 hero to enable it, but I think Herods don't need Overtaken. Like they're strong enough on their own that it's great to have, but the defense is enough as is.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, let's transition into. So we just got a new card spoiled. It's gonna be at Nationals, and this is the promo you get when you enter Nationals, right?
Correct.
And ironically, it's your own Guardian of Your Souls, which is your patented, trademarked icon that you love to use.
It is. This card, it's good. It's a good card. I'm glad they made it. I'd been calling personally after Nationals this last year for Matthew to be banned. I just felt Matthew, if he just drew off evil brigades in hand, but the fact he draws off of all brigades, so powerful. And yes, there's ways around him. Yes, there's Herdsman. Yes, there's Crowd's Lost Soul, but just the principle of it, it's a busted card, and we saw that at Nationals. The top 2 decks were with Matthew, and they did really well. And so the other thing was Soulhide. Like people were really down on Soulhide after Nationals because it didn't do well there. But Jay Chambers just smoked everyone leading up to Nationals. And I think their time was a factor. There are various factors in Nationals, but Soulhide is still an incredibly strong strategy, and it creates NPE. It really does. Like, I don't know how many people in the community have really faced like Jay or someone really competent playing Soulhide, but it is not fun. If your deck isn't prepared for it, you just sit there. There's no souls to rescue. And so what I look at with this card is the Elders address both of those things, to a busted card and then a play style that creates NPE. And, so I think it's an important card. I think it's well designed. Negative player experience.
Yeah, because it can be kind of miserable if you can't even attack.
Yeah, I had, let's see here. So Jay came out, and he was I'm in youth ministry, and so he came out and had spoken at our winter camp last winter, and he brought his Soulhide deck with him. And I think I lost 4 games in a row to that deck, and it was the most miserable experience I've had in Redemption. I was so frustrated at the end of it. It's just not fun. Like sitting and seeing Annis the Elder just get rid of my souls, and then I go in and then Burial. And the thing about it is I was running Soul Surfer against him in much earlier version, and I had Harvest Time in there, I had Orphans, and even with all of that he was still just dominating. And so it's definitely not something that I think is uber healthy. And so the other nice thing about this card, though, is it costs a Dom slot. So if you're going to run this, there is a cost. And the old Guardian of Your Souls, it's the same way. When Falling Away was running around and the Woman's One and was one of the most powerful cards in existence, probably the most powerful card outside Son of God and Second Coming, people still were hesitant to run Guardian of Your Souls. Really fast decks would, because they would be able to get it down, but slower decks sometimes wouldn't. And I think it'll be that way. I think there are decks that this card fits in and belongs in, but there are other builds where it will not, and it would really hamper the deck to use this for Dom slot. But all that to say, when I saw this card, I was a bit bummed because, yes, I was like, this is necessary, this is good, really
Yeah.
smart, but the deck we just reviewed, it hoses the entire offense.
Right, because it's all converting to Meek to try and do things.
Yep.
And Guardian Your Souls, it's like really flavorful because you can't convert your humans to evil characters, but ironically, it also stopping the convert to Meek ability too. That's built into a lot of these cards.
Exactly. And so there was really interesting timing. This card was spoiled, I think it was Tuesday last week, right? And I had my game, the final game with Agger the Wise that night, and I was like, well, here's the swan song. This will be the last game with Soul Surfer for me for the season, where I'm really going to use it in competitive play, because there's other ways you can run Soul Surfer. Like you can do a gold offense with Amazing Faith and Day of Judgment. You can do kind of a silver white thing with Wheat and Tears and Lost Child Found, but those are slower. They're not as good with the deck build, and it doesn't work as well. And so I knew of those, and I was like, yep, this is kind of it. And I was kind of discouraged because I was like, I got to figure out what I'm going to run instead at Nationals. And then, you know, I made kind of a realization, and I think you got the list here. So obviously Matthew doesn't have to convert to Meek. He can reveal a good dominant from hand. Same thing with Simon. And Lazarus has to convert to Meek. Joanna has to, and a build that's Clay Mary has to. She's good in white builds, but that was not the build I had. And so I was like, wait, I could do Purple Disciples. But at first I wasn't sold on it because I was like, man, they're just not as good. Like Authority of Christ doesn't work as good. And the Spirit is a Dove Rescue, Untouchable, Love One Another. I was like, they're just not as strong. So I was like, I still don't think the deck's great. But then I went to build it, and I don't think it's quite as strong, the offense, but I think it's enough. And I think it makes the Soul Surfer strategy still viable. And Matthew offense is still viable with Guardian of Your Souls in the meta. And so the version that I came up with here, I think I studied like the card pool in depth. I surveyed every purple card in the card pool of rotation, and I think this is the best version to go with. Like, there's obviously Simon Peter. He's a really good, disciple, but I feel that these are the right ones, and I'll kind of explain why. But the one thing that this has is a couple perks over the Clay version. I actually feel turn one Matthew, it might be a little better with purple because there's more interrupts and negates. Like you've got Bow Energies, you've got My Lord and My God. And like those are really strong for a turn one rescue with Matthew. Another big perk is that with purple, John the Fisherman is really good. Like backed up by Bow Energies or My Lord and My God, backed up by Walking on Water into His Sacrifice or Authority of Christ from Reserve. Reach of Desperation going into a potential battle winner. Like it really is good because a lot of times decks are trying to ban John the Fisherman in with someone like Matthias or Zacchaeus, or they just go with him solo because he's strong enough solo on his own. But this maximizes the potential of John the Fisherman to be dangerous. And then Bartholomew, I was looking at enhancements like Royal Parade, which obviously in a vacuum is better than My Lord and My God or Bow Energies, but Bartholomew makes good gospel enhancement CBN, and a lot of times that's been used historically with Love One Another, Great Commission. But man, these purple ones work great with him. Walking on Water into His Sacrifice or Authority, My Lord, My God, Bow Energies. That's really really nice. And the thing with him is, he's got big numbers, but with Herod's Temple, they block with someone tiny like Solitarsis. You just trigger Herod's Temple, so I realized those two heroes. I actually, in a way, I'd rather have a rescue with John the Fisherman with Beast Battle Winner package backing him up than Joanna. And, he's more consistent because it's not just a block from hand. And then in this meta, I haven't tested it yet fully, but Bartholomew might be a bit better than Lazarus, who was cut for him because of Nicodemus and, the CBN threat there. Bartholomew gets initiative and then he plays something CBN. And so the other nice thing is, like, turn 1, obviously I'm going purple with Matthew, but turn 2, I can do clay stuff. If they don't have Guardian Your Souls out, I'm able to do Simon the Zealous, grab Authority of Christ from reserve. I'm able to go for an Ascension rescue. And so I can do Simon the Zealous with Spirit as a Dove into, his sacrifice or Day of Judgment. And so that can still do the clay stuff. The best of the clay stuff is all here. That Possessing Spirit rescue, the Authority of Christ. I've still got his sacrifice, big numbers, toss off Herod's temple. So a lot of the best of the clay rescues are still in this build, and they're just, turn 2 or later. But I think the offense, it has enough firepower. It's not quite as strong as the clay stuff, but I've got Reach of Desperation, which that's nicer in this build because New Covenant can tutor for it. So it's easier to get out than Generous Giving. And Thaddeus is obviously inferior to Mary Holy Virgin. He's not as good. But he's easier to get. I can get him with Reassuring Angels and all 3 of the Searcher Angels, not to mention Patmos. And against Honey Pot, I have to run Chronicles of the Kings now because Holy of Holies would negate him. But if I get Humble out, he can get rid of Holy of Holies. So, and he still has the nice stuff of being able to reserve an evil character in their territory, like Mary Holy Virgin did. And he's still pretty tiny numbers. He has 2, so I think he's still good. And I prefer him over Simon Peter just because he's able to do that stuff. Like Simon Peter can play Herod's Temple out, which is nice, but then he's converting to Meek, which he's vulnerable to Guardian of Your Souls and banding, with Pot of Mana running around. I feel Thaddeus gives a bit more upside. But the other thing is New Covenant can actually, doing the purple stuff, that can be something, turn 1, the enhancement side too. That's another little thing there. But
question. Would you ever consider adding Great Commission or Love One Another? Like those seem like great both as purple or clay. So whatever you want to do.
They are definitely on the maybe list. I would want in reserve, and I'd probably go Great Commission over Love One Another because played off of Walking on Water, it's really strong. Whereas Love One Another, you want it as Meek. So Great Commission would be the better one out of the 2. But the issue is just space. I shift Authority of Christ to reserve because Walking on Water is nice, and turn 1, it's not as good as one of those interrupts. So I think like they're great. Great Commission would be the best one, but I do think not main deck because it would interrupt, and these other ones all interrupt and negate turn 1 with Matthew, which is what you want. Without a doubt. Oh, another thing I need to mention about the offense, Reassuring Angels. It gives your disciple Clay Brigade. Turn 1, I'm really wanting to get Reassuring Angels. Like if I have Crowd's Choice as a way to get into Matthew, or if I have Spirit as a Dove and I'm able to tutor for Reassuring Angels, like that's optimal because then my Ascension can work turn 1 with Matthew. And so that's a nice thing is that Reassuring Angels gives that. I also didn't talk about Testing Solomon. It's a little less powerful than Love One Another. Love One Another can hit multiple characters, but oftentimes turn 1 you only have 1 Meek person, and so it's often just hitting 1. But the fact that you get to choose an evil card from opponent's hand, that's nice. Like I like that little hand control element to Testing Solomon, and it's a great card to back up John. Love One Another doesn't back up John well, whereas Testing Solomon does. Let's say they block with Herod Archelaus against John. You go in, toss next, underdeck, regardless of protect, and hit something from their hand.
Yeah, it's just so
it's
good.
Nice. It's a great card. So, I think that's everything with the offense. I like the synergy with the Searcher Angels and Patmos. Like, it's a lot easier to get to your characters in this build than the other one. It has a lot better synergy.
I don't think Matthew's going away because of Guardian of Your Souls. I think the deck can adapt and play more purple and still be a really significant threat.
I agree. At first, I didn't think so, but having built this offense is strong. I'd still prefer the clay one. Like if Guardian of Your Souls wasn't around, I'd probably still run the clay. But this is a powerful offense. It's good. Would
you ever cut Orphans and do the Distress Hostile maybe if Guardian of Souls was entering play?
Once Guardian of Your Souls enters meta, yes, Orphans gets cut for Distressed. 100%. Yeah, definitely that's what happens. So yeah, that's the plan. But for now, it's not legal till Nationals. In the Grand Prix where we're testing out Guardian of Your Souls, I will switch.
Gotcha.
Because I think once Guardian of Your Souls hits the meta, Soulhide, there's just too much against it. The new Lost Souls from Roots that is so easy to generate souls with. You know, Harvest obviously is a factor, and then that Dominant, it really going to make Soulhide a dangerous thing to run. Lost Child Found doesn't work in this offense anymore. But the nice thing is, even though because I wouldn't even want to run it for the play Lost Soul from a deck ability because I have nothing that matches, but Walking on Water, which is a great card in this offense, with its ability to add a good card from reserve to battle, it has that star ability. So I was able to put something in that I've wanted for a long time in my other Soul Surfer build, Goliath's Curse. I think Goliath's Curse is one of the most important cards in the game right now. I run it in most of my other deck builds because think about everything this card can get around. And I actually would prefer having it over Lost Child Found. Lost Child Found is fantastic. Gets rid of 3 counters, but it's only for 1 turn. And also Salty sometimes is negating it. And so in this build, Goliath's Curse is better. So that's one nice thing about the purple is I get that play Lost Soul from Walking on Water, and I can play Goliath's Curse. Goliath's Curse gets rid of Moses, Cloud of Witnesses. Goliath's Curse gets rid of Nazareth. Goliath's Curse gets rid of Glory of the Lord, which means then I can negate with, you know, my Manger or my Woes, their Holy of Holies. Goliath's Curse gets rid of Herod's Temple. It is just a phenomenal card. And I really like being able to run that with the shift in the offense. I do miss Shipwreck, but I feel that Goliath's Curse kind of offsets that a bit because it's a better counter to good fortresses like Nazareth and Herod's Temple than Lost Child Found was. But yeah, I have to run Chronicles for dealing with Holy Holies. It's just unfortunately necessary. And also, I wouldn't want Shipwreck because I need more good dominance. This offense, obviously, you want good dominance to make your characters work on the purple side. Mayhem is the only just straight evil dominant, but Mayhem is able to get you to good dominance. It digs, right? You get your hand down and allows for digging to a good dominance. So yeah, that's it. That's everything with the offense. I just realized I should point those things out.
I just have 2 more questions. So you cut White from the deck. Do you still think Reprimand Repercussion is something you'd want to have for the Herods? Or is it just that good of a card?
To me, the best battle winners to back up Herod's main deck are Revolt and Reprimand Repercussion, because not only do they negate or interrupt, but they can, with they're a battle winner of themselves, withdraw up to 2 characters, set aside all characters in battle until you begin a rescue attempt. So yeah, I can't think of many other battle winners I'd rather have there in that slot as a negate. Like you've got Reclaimed by Egypt. That's the other one that can be a battle winner. I cut it for Foreign Spears a long time ago because Foreign Spears can deal with Nazareth. But yeah, if I were doing like the Herod's Executioner or Foreign Horses route, then yeah, I'd do something else. Like honestly, I wouldn't be running Abandonment. Like Abandonment gets tossed by some of the banding offenses. Like Daniel's the main banding offense right now. No Straw is the card that I'd run in that slot if I were doing Foreign Horses and Herod's Executioner, because No Straw is OT, so Daniel doesn't negate it, and it's single brigade, so Michael doesn't toss it. Obviously, if they have, what's the one, Servants by the River, that protects their humans, but still, like, that's a really strong battle winner. So I've thought about putting No Straw in because I'm a little more vulnerable to Daniel decks without Golgotha. So I've been thinking about No Straw for a while. So that's something I considered testing, but I would actually probably keep Reprimand. No, actually, no. Well, I like it because it's a straight negate, but yeah, I think Revolt is nice because it gets rid of all the characters in battle. So yeah, I've considered testing No Straw, even without the Executioner package, because No Straw is a really good card in this meta.
I guess the only last question I have is like, So imagine if I'm like a new player trying to learn how to play this deck and wanting to take it to a tournament. What's some advice that you'd give to me as like a newer player wanting to learn and master something like this?
Yeah, good question. So I'd say, first of all, don't expect it to go smooth right away. It's not an easy deck to pilot because you obviously have these cards that are not optimal cards. Now, the purple build is a little better with that because, like, Walking on Water is an optimal card for this build. You'd want it in a Purple Disciples build. Dissension is still a really good card in this build. Manger and Repudiating Rulers are really the only ones, but it is different running a deck where you aren't optimizing every slot for the long term of the game. And so understanding then the deck is inherently a little weaker from that standpoint. The other thing you have to know is what deck you're playing against. The ones that play a Lost Soul from each deck, Manger, Repudiating Rulers, and Day of Judgment, those are invaluable because I look at my opponent's deck first and get deck knowledge. I try to figure out what they might have in hand from that, and then I figure out what counter I want, and then I'll play a Lost Soul from my deck. So those are really important cards because you get that knowledge. Harvest Time, of course, does the same thing. And so often I will go to my opponent's deck first, see what they've got going on. If I know what my opponent's running, then sometimes I'll go to mine first. But sometimes you don't know that, especially in a tournament where the meta's unfamiliar. You don't know what people are running. It's a big tournament like state or regionals.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a huge thing, is getting the right Lost Soul out. The other thing is playing around salty. Like, Spirit as a Dove is important. Sometimes you're needing to get your Son of God to close out the game. And so you have to know the right time to give salty up or to negate it. Crowds, same thing. You have to play around crowds because of how prevalent Entrapping Pharisee and Terrifying B-Star in the meta. Domitian in some builds, some gray builds, they're running Domitian. And so you just have to be really careful with those cards. I would say too, like, playing Disciples, a lot of people play Disciples and have been playing them. Either version, I'm not just talking about the purple version, but either one, it's an offense that is really strong, but it is kind of technical to play. Like, you have to choose your rescues at the right time, interact with Herod's Temple right. Like, a lot of the stuff with Simon is kind of technical. So memorize those lines of play, know your lines of play really well so that in the game you know what you're doing. And so that's something else I'd mention. Herods are fairly straightforward to play. Like, I remember, I think it was Jay Chambers. He let me see if I can find the message. He had a really funny quote about Herods. He sent me. Where is it? It was funny. He said that Herods are beyond boring, and the lines can be chilling in Oregon and are plainly visible in Michigan. And that's true. The lines of play with Herods, they're not the most complex by any means. So I think that's probably the easiest part of the deck, is piloting the Herod's defense. And even like Repudiating Rulers, that's straightforward. You know when you're going to go into duplicity to unsuccessful. Like, it's an easy defense. The most technical stuff is probably, like, often I say it's best to trigger Herod's Temple before you block. Like, that's something to remember. And especially if you're blocking with outsiders, trigger Herod's Temple before you block if you're going to try and underdeck. And then the little trick with equipping foreign spears to toss down their person. Like, those are some of the more technical things. Also making sure if you have Herod's Guard, you put your Herods down in territory. And, the other technical part is possessing spirit. If you are wanting to get that out, probably hold off on an Outsiders or Herod Agrippa block, unless if you absolutely have to. That was less critical in the version with white because you could bounce Herod Agrippa and Outsiders with Lost Child Found, but you can't do that here. So once they're down, they're kind of down. And so I'll often try to block with other things until I get Possessing Spirit into play. But that's mostly the deck. The tricky part is figuring out what Lost Soul to get out. And
if you have no idea what your opponent's doing, what Lost Soul would you grab if you could only grab one?
If I have absolutely no idea what my opponent is doing and I'm going first, I'm probably going to go to Complacent, try and, or Salty, one of those, because those are kind of universally good counters. Accusers would be on the back burner just because of how prevalent Herdsman and Garrar is. That would be something right behind those two, but probably Complacent and Salty. If they're going first, I have no idea what they're running. Likely Complacent, Salty, or Crowds, just because Matthew is still really prevalent. I think we'll see less Matthew because once Guardian of Your Souls hits the meta, that's going to kind of hate some Matthew out of the meta. But I think maybe people will see this and run Matthew with purple, and you can run purple Disciples and not do Soul Surfer. Like, that's a deck. I personally prefer this because it makes my Matthew rescues more likely to happen. But you know, that's a deck. So I think definitely, though, I'd say it's the same. Probably Complacent and Salty. Those are the ones I get out.
Oh, great. Well, before we log off here, is there anything else you wanted to say or talk about?
Well, thanks for having me on, Tim, and I appreciate, you know, all the work that you're doing with your videos, but also shout out, you know, Land of Redemption has gotten a huge shot in the arm of life with Tim joining on board as an editor, and he's doing a lot of editing and stuff to make the site a better place, and he's better with visual stuff than me and everything with tech than me. So, you know, he deserves a huge shout out. I'm thankful for you and all you're doing for Land of Redemption, and really great to have you on board. And, you know, I'm looking forward to regionals with you in just a little bit and meeting you in person. Yeah,
regionals coming up.
Playing some games.
Yeah, I love Land of Redemption. Great job with the site. I'm happy to help keep it afloat and make it better. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. We're wrapping up about an hour mark right here. So see you next time.